The freezing wind bit my face as I stood frozen on the porch of my childhood home. My name is Sophia. I am 30 years old, but that night I felt like a foolish child. I had just received a text message from my mother claiming our traditional Christmas party was canceled because their financial situation was incredibly tight right now. Ignoring that message completely, I decided to drive over anyway to drop off the gifts I had carefully wrapped for everyone. When I pulled into the neighborhood, I immediately noticed the driveway was completely packed with cars while the entire house glowed with bright, festive lights. I approached the front porch quietly and stood right outside the front door that someone had left slightly open. Peering through the narrow gap, I saw my parents and my sister cheerfully raising their champagne glasses in the center of the living room. My sister clinked her glass against my mother's glass while wearing a massive, triumphant grin. "Merry Christmas, it is so much better without Sophia here." Hearing those cruel words coming from my own flesh and blood made my blood boil instantly. I raised my hands to push the door wide open to confront their disgusting hypocrisy face to face. Just as my fingers touched the wood, a firm hand suddenly reached out from the dark shadows behind me and pulled me back sharply. A familiar deep voice whispered closely against my ear to warn me against revealing my position just yet. "Stay calm. The real show is about to begin." If you want to see how I systematically dismantle this ruthless betrayal from my own family, please hit that subscribe button to follow my entire journey. Stepping back into the dark shadows of the driveway away from the glowing porch felt like waking up from a terrible nightmare. The firm hand that had pulled me away from the front door belonged to my husband, Clark. He is a highly observant corporate lawyer who had quietly followed me tonight because his instincts warned him something was completely wrong with the sudden party cancellation. Clark kept his voice low while guiding me further down the street toward where he had parked his vehicle out of sight. He explained very clearly that kicking the door down right now would only allow them to spin the narrative to make me look like an unhinged aggressor. Clark pointed out that barging into the living room without any concrete preparation would simply give them the perfect opportunity to play the victim card in front of the entire neighborhood. "They will just deny any malicious intent and act like you ruined a private, quiet dinner," Clark whispered while unlocking the passenger side door for me to get inside. Once we were safely sitting inside the quiet cabin of his car, he finally revealed the real reason he had been investigating the situation behind my back. Over the past few weeks, Clark had noticed some highly suspicious discrepancies regarding the profit margins from the 3 retail stores I had confidently entrusted to my parents to manage. The revenue numbers had been dropping significantly, without any logical explanation or changes in the local market conditions. He suspected that someone was deliberately siphoning funds from the operational accounts to pay for personal expenses. It was absolutely sickening to realize that my dad Clayton and my mom Jocelyn were currently funding their lavish holiday celebration using the business revenue I worked so hard to build. Even worse was the bitter realization that they were enjoying this stolen luxury alongside my sister Mallory, who had never contributed a single dime to the family business. A fierce wave of anger burned in my chest when I pictured Mallory clinking glasses with Dad and Mom inside that comfortable house. I desperately wanted to march right back up that driveway to demand accountability for every single missing dollar they had taken from my company. However, Clark placed a steadying hand on my shoulder to remind me that we needed solid legal proof before making any formal accusations against them. Confronting them without undeniable financial documents would only give them the chance to cover their tracks and manipulate the rest of our relatives into taking their side against me. Taking a deep breath to steady my racing pulse, I realized his logical approach was the only way to truly protect my hard-earned assets from further exploitation. I nodded in agreement before buckling my seatbelt as Clark started the engine to drive us away from the deceptive scene. During the tense drive back to our own house, we began outlining the very first steps of a comprehensive legal plan to gather the necessary evidence. Clark suggested that we perform a complete internal audit of the store accounts the very next morning to see exactly where the missing profits were being diverted. I agreed to securely download all the banking statements along with the vendor invoices before my parents could realize we were actively looking into their daily operations. We discussed checking the payroll records to ensure no fake employees were being used to drain the accounts further. We knew that taking back complete control of my business would require absolute patience instead of a quick, emotional outburst tonight. We needed to build an airtight legal case that would leave them absolutely no room to lie their way out of the inevitable consequences. The next morning, Clark and I immediately accessed the central server hosting the financial databases for the 3 retail stores located in Ann Arbor. Sitting together in our home office, we spent the first hour downloading the complete history of vendor payments and operational expenses covering the past 12 months. We needed to scrutinize every individual transaction to understand exactly how much revenue had been siphoned away from the daily operations. The 3 locations in Ann Arbor were supposed to be the foundational pillars of my company, generating steady income that I trusted my family to manage. Seeing the raw data exposing their theft stripped away the last remaining illusions I held about their loyalty to our family. We quickly uncovered a clear pattern of fake invoices alongside unauthorized cash withdrawals that were all directly approved and signed by Clayton. He had deliberately created phantom suppliers charging monthly fees for maintenance services that were never actually performed at any of the retail locations. Clark took the initiative to cross-reference the billing addresses for these supposed maintenance companies using the public property registry on his computer. We discovered that the registered addresses belonged to empty parking lots or abandoned buildings rather than legitimate operational business headquarters in the city. Using accounting software from his law firm, Clark traced every redirected dollar moving through those fraudulent vendor accounts. It took several hours of data matching between the store ledgers and the banking routing numbers to expose the final destination of the stolen funds. Look at these transfer logs. They have been funding her gambling habits for months. Clark pointed at a highlighted column showing weekly deposits routed directly into online casinos. I cannot believe they are draining the business I built just to cover her debts, I replied while staring at the evidence flashing across the monitor. They were sacrificing the stability of a successful enterprise to protect someone who refused to take responsibility for her own financial choices. To ensure we did not accidentally alert them to our investigation, I picked up my phone to send Jocelyn a standard holiday greeting as if nothing had happened the previous night. Almost immediately after hitting send, my phone screen lit up with a lengthy text message from her complaining about their financial hardships and begging for my sympathy. Reading her messages about struggling to pay utility bills while knowing she was actively funneling thousands of dollars to Mallory made my stomach turn. I swallowed my disgust and typed out a brief message of sympathy to maintain the illusion of my ignorance regarding their ongoing deceit. I forced myself to put the phone face down on the desk so I would not be tempted to call her and scream the truth into the receiver. Turning our attention back to the monitors, Clark began printing out every transaction record to create a physical paper trail for our upcoming confrontation. The rhythmic sound of the printer producing page after page of incriminating evidence filled the room while we sat in complete silence. He carefully organized the stacks of vendor receipts and the corresponding bank transfer statements into a legal binder that would stand up in any court proceeding. "We have everything we need right here in these documents," Clark assured me while securing the heavy binder inside his locked briefcase for safekeeping. We finally held the concrete proof of their betrayal in our hands and simply needed to wait for the moment they would approach me, asking for another sum of money. We knew perfectly well that their current gambling debts would soon force them to reach out with another fabricated emergency, requiring my financial assistance within the next few days. A few days later, my phone vibrated with an unexpected call from my parents, demanding an urgent meeting at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. They insisted it was an absolute emergency, requiring my immediate attention during the middle of my busy workday. Walking into the nearly empty cafe, I spotted Clayton and Jocelyn sitting in a corner booth, wearing carefully constructed expressions of deep stress and exhaustion. They had chosen a secluded table far away from the front windows to ensure our conversation remained completely private from any passing pedestrians. Before I could even order a drink, they launched into a rehearsed presentation about needing a massive influx of cash to secure a lucrative commercial real estate investment. According to their fabricated story, this sudden business opportunity would finally generate enough passive income to pull our entire family out of our current financial hardships. Dad leaned across the table with a desperate look in his eyes to emphasize how critical this timing was for their supposed venture. "We just need this one investment, Sophia. It will turn everything around for our family," he pleaded while sliding a piece of paper with a specific dollar amount written across it. Looking down at the folded napkin, I instantly recognized the exact figure they were begging me to provide for their fake real estate deal. The requested cash matched right down to the exact decimal point the latest gambling debt Mallory had accumulated at the underground casinos during the previous week. Clark had already briefed me on this specific outstanding balance after intercepting another batch of digital invoices sent to her offshore accounts yesterday morning. Instead of reacting with the explosive anger they probably expected, I maintained a perfectly neutral expression while folding my hands resting on the wooden table. Calmly shifting the conversation away from their imaginary investment project, I focused directly on the existing business operations they were supposed to be running. "Where exactly is the profit from the 3 stores I entrusted to you both?" I asked while looking directly into my mother's eyes without blinking. Deliberately questioning them about the severe drop in monthly revenue, I demanded a logical explanation for the skyrocketing maintenance expenses we had recently noticed. Their carefully rehearsed confidence shattered instantly under my direct scrutiny regarding the retail locations they had been actively draining for several consecutive months. Clayton started stumbling over his words, while attempting to blame the local economic downturn for the sudden lack of profitable retail margins. Jocelyn shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while continuously avoiding my gaze and nervously stirring her completely cold cup of black coffee. Realizing their logical financial excuses were failing to convince me, they quickly abandoned the defensive strategy and pivoted straight into aggressive psychological manipulation. My mother raised her voice loudly enough to draw the attention of the barista working behind the counter on the opposite side of the room. "You are so selfish to interrogate your own parents when we are struggling to survive," she hissed with genuine venom seeping into her tone. They took turns berating me for being a cold and calculating daughter who cared more about profit margins than supporting her own flesh and blood during difficult times. Listening to these cruel and entirely unjustified accusations pouring from their mouths finally severed the last remaining thread of familial loyalty inside my heart. Seeing them fiercely protect Mallory while actively trying to manipulate me into funding her destructive lifestyle revealed their true characters beyond any shadow of a doubt. I realized there was absolutely no hope left for saving this toxic relationship through reasonable communication or establishing healthier financial boundaries. Without saying another word in response to their escalating insults, I simply picked up my purse and pushed my chair away from their table. Turning my back on their unreasonable demands, I walked straight out the front door of the cafe into the afternoon sunlight without hesitating even once. Stepping into my car, my mind felt incredibly clear, because my final decision to cut them out of my life permanently was officially locked into place. That same evening, I returned to our quiet house feeling completely drained from the exhausting confrontation at the coffee shop. Dropping my car keys on the kitchen counter, I walked straight into the living room and collapsed onto the comfortable sofa next to Clark. I recounted the entire disastrous meeting, detailing how they aggressively defended Mallory while demanding the exact amount needed to cover her underground gambling debts. "I want to freeze all the accounts tomorrow morning and lock them out of the stores entirely," I told him while staring blankly at the dark television screen. Clark immediately shook his head and leaned forward to stop my impulsive reaction before I could contact the bank branch manager to initiate the lockdown. He explained meticulously that cutting off their financial access without any public explanation would give them the ultimate upper hand in the familial narrative. Clark pointed out that Clayton and Jocelyn would simply run to every relative and mutual friend to paint me as a greedy daughter, abandoning her struggling parents. They would deliberately twist the operational facts to make my sudden financial withdrawal look like an act of unprovoked cruelty driven by pure selfishness. If you do it quietly, they will spin the story and play the victims to everyone we know, Clark warned while handing me a glass of cold water to help calm my racing nerves. He proposed a much more calculated approach that would permanently strip away their ability to manipulate the truth or invent new excuses. We needed to deliver a public consequence directly in front of their peers and my influential business partners, so there would be absolutely no room for denial. We had the perfect opportunity approaching this upcoming weekend during my annual Corporate Appreciation Gala scheduled to take place at the downtown luxury hotel. Agreeing completely with his strategic legal mindset, I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed the number for Jocelyn before I could second-guess the plan. When my mother answered the phone with a noticeably cold tone, I forced myself to swallow my remaining pride and project a highly apologetic voice. I pretended to feel immense guilt regarding my harsh questioning at the cafe earlier that afternoon, claiming the stress of running the business had temporarily clouded my judgment. I am sorry for doubting you earlier. I will have the full investment check ready at the corporate gala. I lied smoothly while making direct eye contact with Clark sitting across the wooden coffee table. The freezing hostility in her voice vanished instantly upon hearing the definitive promise of a massive financial payout being delivered to them so soon. She immediately shifted into a sickly sweet tone, suddenly showering me with fake gratitude and praising my generosity as a wonderfully loving daughter who always supported her family. Jocelyn eagerly accepted the formal invitation for the entire family to attend the prestigious corporate event this Saturday to receive the investment funds in person. Disconnecting the call after confirming the event details a cold sense of absolute determination settled over me as I placed the phone face down on the sofa cushion. While my parents most likely started celebrating their easy manipulation victory, Clark and I walked back into the home office to begin organizing the digital evidence. We spent the remainder of the night carefully compiling the fraudulent vendor invoices and the offshore casino transfer logs into a seamless presentation. Clark transferred the scanned physical documents onto a portable encrypted flash drive to ensure the sensitive files remained secure until the actual event started. We systematically arranged the damning banking records into a chronological slideshow format that anyone could easily understand without needing an accounting degree. I personally verified that the name of every fake supplier created by Clayton matched perfectly with the corresponding withdrawals from our corporate business accounts. We were going to make absolutely sure the visual data files were perfectly optimized for the massive digital screen standing right behind the main stage at the gala venue. That Saturday evening, the grand ballroom of the downtown hotel was filled with my most influential business partners and corporate investors. Standing near the entrance, I watched Clayton, Jocelyn, and Mallory strut into the elegant venue wearing expensive designer clothing they had undoubtedly purchased using my stolen retail profits. They carried themselves with an overwhelming sense of unearned arrogance while aggressively mingling with the various executives and suppliers gathered across the room. Holding a crystal glass of champagne, my mother actively sought out my top regional distributors to loudly boast about their upcoming financial windfall. She deliberately raised her voice to ensure maximum attention from the surrounding crowd of wealthy professionals dressed in formal attire. "We are so proud to announce that Sophia is finally expanding our branch management tonight," Jocelyn proclaimed while gesturing grandly toward my father and sister standing nearby. Hearing her confidently spread those absolute lies to my professional colleagues made my grip tighten around the microphone resting on the main podium. They were completely convinced they had successfully manipulated me into handing over another massive fortune to cover their hidden underground debts. Waiting until the catering staff finished serving the main course, I tapped the microphone to command the attention of the crowded banquet hall. The room quickly quieted down as hundreds of faces turned toward the brightly lit stage where I stood alone under the spotlight. I formally invited my parents and my sister to step forward into the center of the room to receive their special corporate appreciation gift. Instead of a check, I have a different kind of presentation for my family to share with everyone. I announced smoothly while looking directly into my father's greedy eyes. Assuming I was simply building suspense for a massive public payout, Clayton confidently led Jocelyn and Mallory straight up the carpeted stairs to stand right beside me. They were smiling smugly at the audience while waiting for me to hand them the imaginary corporate investment funds. Without breaking eye contact with my sister, I subtly nodded toward Clark sitting at the front table with his laptop connected to the audiovisual system. He instantly pressed the execute key on his keyboard to activate the massive LED screen positioned directly behind the main speaker podium. The entire wall suddenly illuminated with high-resolution images of their fraudulent vendor invoices displayed right next to the corresponding casino transfer logs. The undeniable digital evidence of their ongoing theft was projected in massive letters for every single business partner and investor to read clearly. A heavy silence immediately fell over the expansive ballroom as the guests quickly processed the damning financial statements flashing across the glowing screen. The spreadsheet highlighted the exact routing numbers linking my corporate retail accounts directly to Mallory's offshore gambling deposits over the past 12 months. Realizing their entire deceitful operation was being broadcast to the most important people in my industry, my parents physically recoiled in absolute horror. "Turn that screen off right now. You are humiliating your own flesh and blood," Clayton shouted frantically while waving his arms at the technical crew sitting in the back corner. I simply stood my ground beside the podium and completely ignored his desperate demands to hide the glaring truth from the silent audience. The undeniable public humiliation caused Mallory to lose whatever remaining composure she had left as she began screaming uncontrollably at the projected casino receipts. Her hysterical outburst only drew more disgusted stares from the corporate executives, who were now quietly whispering among themselves about the blatant embezzlement. My mother turned completely pale while covering her face with both hands to block out the harsh reality of their public exposure. Unable to endure the suffocating shame of being unmasked in front of the local business community, Clayton grabbed Jocelyn by the arm and shoved his way through the crowd. Mallory quickly chased after them in tears as they frantically pushed through the heavy wooden double doors and fled the hotel without looking back. The very next morning, the harsh sound of heavy pounding on my front door echoed through the quiet hallways before the sun had even fully risen above the horizon. Clayton and Jocelyn had driven to my house in a state of absolute fury, screaming the most vile insults and demanding that I immediately issue a public retraction for the previous night. Standing firmly behind the locked glass door of the foyer, I watched them through the security camera feed as they paced back and forth across my private driveway like caged animals. They were frantically claiming that I had fabricated the financial documents and intentionally sabotaged their reputations out of some twisted sense of personal vengeance. Jocelyn began banging her fists against the reinforced glass panels while hysterically shrieking that I owed them a formal apology and a massive financial compensation package for the public embarrassment. "Open this door immediately and fix the lies you spread about us last night," Clayton roared while kicking the base of the door with enough force to trigger the silent security alarm in the kitchen. I remained completely motionless in the shadows of the hallway, refusing to grant them the emotional reaction or the physical confrontation they were so desperately trying to provoke. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and dialed the emergency services number while keeping my voice steady and devoid of any lingering familial warmth. Looking directly at the camera lens so they could see my lack of hesitation, I spoke clearly into the receiver to report 2 aggressive trespassers refusing to leave my private property. If you don't step off my property in 10 seconds, the police will escort you away. I warned them through the external intercom system with a tone as cold as winter ice. Recognizing the blue lights of a patrol car approaching from the end of the suburban street, they finally retreated to their vehicle and sped away while shouting one final round of profanities. By the middle of the afternoon, however, their strategy shifted from physical intimidation to a coordinated character assassination campaign across every major social media platform. Jocelyn and Mallory began posting lengthy, tear-filled videos and fabricated stories portraying themselves as the heartbroken victims of a cold-blooded and ungrateful daughter. They shamelessly lied about the business arrangements, claiming I had illegally seized their hard-earned assets and left my own aging parents completely destitute for no legitimate reason. These malicious posts quickly gained traction among distant relatives and casual acquaintances who were eager to consume the sensationalized drama without knowing any of the underlying financial facts. In the midst of this toxic storm of public judgment and online vitriol, my best friend Chloe arrived at my house carrying 2 large cups of coffee and a bag of lunch. She bypassed the piles of unread mail on the porch and came straight into the living room to sit closely beside me on the sofa. Chloe could see that I was struggling to maintain my composure while watching the notification count on my phone climb into the hundreds as strangers attacked my character. "Don't read those comments, Sophia. They are just desperate and trying to drag you down," Chloe insisted, while gently taking the phone out of my hands and placing it face down on the far end of the coffee table. She spent the next several hours distractedly chatting about neutral topics and reminding me of the undeniable evidence we had already secured within Clark's legal files. Her presence provided the essential emotional anchor I needed to stay rational and avoid falling into the trap of responding to their pathetic online provocations. With Chloe's steady support, I was able to ignore the digital noise and hand over full authority to Clark to initiate the final phase of our counterattack. He spent the evening finishing the formal cease and desist orders alongside the comprehensive civil lawsuits for embezzlement and defamation of character. Clark systematically prepared the legal documents required to permanently terminate their access to my business and recover every cent they had funneled into Mallory's gambling accounts. The room felt strangely peaceful as we sat together, knowing that we were finally moving toward a permanent resolution that would uproot their influence from my life forever. 2 weeks later, the chaotic storm of social media defamation and familial harassment finally began to subside under the weight of Clark's aggressive legal intervention. As my primary legal representative, he issued formal cease and desist orders, accompanied by a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for criminal embezzlement and character assassination. Clayton and Jocelyn were forced to scrub every malicious post and tear-filled video from their social media profiles within 24 hours to avoid immediate arrest for their illegal activities. The official legal documents carried absolute authority, permanently revoking their management rights over the 3 retail stores in Ann Arbor that they had systematically exploited for years. They lost every single cent of the fraudulent income they had been funneling into Mallory's offshore gambling accounts, leaving them completely exposed to their massive outstanding debts. Without my constant financial subsidies to protect her, Mallory's gambling obligations officially matured, leading to severe legal repercussions and aggressive debt collectors arriving at their doorstep daily. I made the definitive choice to change my personal phone numbers and block every remaining method of communication from my toxic biological relatives. I walked away from those blood ties without a single trace of misplaced guilt or lingering sympathy for people who had viewed me as nothing more than a bottomless bank account. Standing on the front porch of my home, I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air and smiled at the realization that my new life had finally begun. I felt a profound sense of absolute freedom and internal peace while standing beside Clark, the only person who had consistently protected my interests throughout this ordeal. We were no longer bound by the shadows of their manipulation, and for the first time in years, I could look toward the future without the suffocating weight of their constant financial demands. Before we end today's story, don't rush away just yet, because the ending of Sophia's journey holds a mirror to many of our own lives. This is not just about a family dispute over money, but about the fundamental necessity of setting boundaries for your own mental survival. The real problem was never just the stolen funds, but the toxic belief that shared DNA grants someone the right to destroy your life without consequence. The lesson to take away here is clear. Loyalty must be earned through mutual respect, not demanded through manipulation or biological ties. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember these three truths. First, you are not responsible for the poor financial choices of grown adults, even if they are your parents. Second, walking away from people who hurt you is an act of self-respect rather than an act of betrayal. Third, true family consists of the people who support your growth, not those who only celebrate your bank account. Please remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you certainly cannot save people who refuse to stop drowning themselves. So if you were in Sophia's position, would you have the courage to expose your own family to save yourself? Or would you have handled this betrayal differently? Share your perspective in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to support the channel for more life lessons.